Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the show. Today, I have with me Tiffany Perkins-Munn. She is the head of marketing data and analytics for JP Chase. And we're going to be talking about critical thinking and forming opinions, which I think is the bedrock of what we're trying to achieve, certainly with data, its impact, how well we perform with data. So I can't wait to get into this discussion. So Tiffany, welcome along to the show.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me. Looking forward to the discussion.
Yeah, me too. I've already framed this up actually, that critical thinking and forming opinions is the
Right.
kind of foundation of data stuff. That's going to be where I want to go first. But why don't we first introduce yourself a little bit more than I have, please, Tiffany? That'd be great.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So I am currently, as you mentioned, the head of marketing data and analytics for JP Morgan Chase. My career has really always been around research, analytics, and data.
Okay.
In fact, my official training, like my PhD, is in social personality psychology with an interdisciplinary concentration in advanced quantitative methods. That's a mouthful, and
It
really
is.
all that means, I
It is. I
know,
don't even know what those words mean. Help.
all it means is like applied statistics. Like, what is the
Right.
practical application of statistics to real world problems? Real world problems for me have been across industry, different aspects of financial services, but always about measuring and understanding behaviors.
Yeah.
Might be market participants, could be students, could be consumers, but how do you measure, analyze, and really interpret those behaviors?
Gotcha. So there is obviously with your founding in kind of psychology and people. I guess there's often a people element, particularly with behavior. But is that been like the sort of main focus, how people act and
Yeah.
behave?
So the way that I help people understand is if you in financial services, I think it's easy to understand because if you think about data as being two sides of a coin, on the one side, you have investments data, which is all about portfolio construction, asset allocation,
Mm,
how do you align your portfolio better with the market? On the other side of that coin is consumers. How are you
yeah.
engaging with consumers, attracting, meeting them where they are, understanding their needs? I've worked on both sides, but my preference is really in that consumer space where we're really trying to be more effective in terms of how we deliver for clients.
Gotcha. And has this idea of kind of critical thinking and forming opinions been has that sort of fallen out of the work that you've done, or has it been the driver for the work you've done?
It is critically important, especially in the data and analytics space. Um, so I think people have a tendency to lean into tools, right?
Mm,
Like
mm,
tools and technologies. Can you use this? Can you write in this language? What coding languages do you know? Do you use different business intelligence tools, Tableau, Click? Can you do, have you ever used a client data platform or data management platform like tools and acronyms?
mm,
And that's not in the idea is that those tools help you to think more critically, but that's not really accurate because one of the most important aspects of critical thinking is the ability to decide what you're aiming to achieve, right? And then make a decision based on a range of possibilities. And you have to be able to think clearly and systematically to be able to improve the way you express your ideas and the way you think through logical steps. And I
mm.
think sometimes people have a tendency to lean into tools and techniques and technologies to help them do that. But really, that should come first. You should
Yeah.
be thinking critically around the solution and then determine which tool or technology is best to help you answer the question.
Yeah. So the critical thinking part of that is about sounds like is about how you think through the problem in the first place, how you
Absolutely.
unpick it, how you look at the different, I don't know, the different outcomes that it could go to, what the different inputs. So it's a kind of almost the process of thinking through a problem.
Right. Because
And
basically you learn how to analyze the logical structure of text, right?
mm,
And then what does that do? That helps in terms of how you communicate, how it enhances both your language and your presentation skills. It is a skill that I think people we don't lean into and
mm,
that you kind of develop over time, but that we should be more focused on during the sort of the lifespan of one's career journey, because it is the one thing that is transportable, right? It's extrapolatable. You can use it in every scenario, and in fact, you need it, and regardless of industry.
Yeah. What's the problem, I suppose? Are we no good at this? Do we struggle to think critically?
I
Do
think
people have
that
a challenge with making it work?
yeah, I think we lean a lot into buzzwords, tools, and we follow trends a lot, right? So if you think about it, in 2012, Thomas Davenport came out with his article about data science being the new sexy career. I was like, woohoo, right? Because I had been doing it for 20 years. Thanks, Tom. And but it was a revolution, right, for the industry. And now everybody wants to be a data scientist.
Yeah.
So all these boot camps popped up and people started going out and getting training, spending 1 year of immersive, intensive training on data science. And what they teach you, there's some critical thinking skills there, but it's all critical thinking skills typically around a technology, a solution, a coding, statistics
Right.
kind of issue. It's not like not that it doesn't happen at all, but so much of it is learning the tech skills that you need to answer the question, and less so about really learning how to think through the problem. Like
Yeah.
for
Totally
me,
different
there are
things.
questions. Yeah, for me, there are questions you can answer just using a basic like Excel tool,
Yeah.
right? But you have to be able to understand how you need to wrangle the data to do that.
Yeah. And yeah, to me, the critical thinking is part of any learning, really. Learning anything, it sort of has some critical thinking, but there's, I think, independent of the problem you're trying to solve,
Right.
the thing you're trying to do is how you better think critically. And that is, I think, what you're saying is a skill in its own right that you can learn regardless of industry. Actually, I would have
Absolutely.
thought there's not just data folk.
Yeah, and we don't teach. I mean, I think we teach it in schools as a byproduct. Like as you go through the process of analyzing this text for this book or writing this report, et cetera, there's this assumption that you are learning to think critically. But really putting it out there as a curriculum on its own, as you are here to learn how to be a critical thinker, is not something that we do. And in fact, it wasn't until probably grad school that I really learned how to critique, think critically through an issue, and redesign. Like, okay, I don't, that particular solution doesn't work. What are other possible solutions? How do you do what if scenario planning? It came later in life for me. And I think that's a function of like our inability to sort of focus on it as its own thing
Yeah.
in school.
Right. Well, let's come back to. I want to come back to kind of how we get better at it actually in a short while, because I think unpicking what it is first is super important, and the other bit is kind of why it's hard. So
Right.
why are we even sort of almost having this conversation about trying to unpick what it is, and we're not really doing it, and we keep thinking about technology. Like, why is critical thinking a challenging thing to do?
Because it's hard. It really is hard. It's not an easy thing to do. I think we like to think in sort of platitudes and concepts, right? High level strategy. I think we are more equipped to think theoretically and conceptually than through an execution lens. And what happens is that once you take that high level strategy and you start unpacking it, okay, here's what you want to accomplish, but how do you accomplish that? Like literally, what are the steps that you need to take to get from point A to point Z? That's where critical thinking really becomes important. And when you start laying out those steps for yourself, you actually start honing your critical thinking skills, because at every moment, at every step, you're actually saying to yourself, this will or this probably won't work based on the knowledge you already have about the space. And you do that and you keep doing that at each step. And that's where critical thinking skills are really developed. But so many people actually like to think conceptually. By the way, we need the people who have the vision. I'm not suggesting that we don't. Like having the vision is very important. but the how do you move from vision to the outcome is really where those critical thinking skills are
Right.
most important. And so I think we do a lot less of that.
Mm.
And we're often trying to solution a problem, but we're also often trying to take shortcuts, right?
Yeah.
Just as that's just the nature of human nature, right? We
Yeah.
want to get to the outcome as soon as we can. And sometimes critical thinking, you lose some of that logic in taking those shortcuts.
We almost don't have the time. We don't allow ourselves to have the time to take a step back, think through the problem. We want to rush. We want to get to the answer because the answer is the thing that moves us forward.
Exactly.
Thinking through kind of can feel like it's slowing you down. But
Yes.
it's what's really interesting there is you talked earlier about sort of psychology and understanding behavior, and now we're talking about kind of which is sort of very messy, right? And now we're talking about critical thinking and it being quite structured and process and steps and stages. So I don't know. Is critical thinking a science or an art? Or is it a bit of both? Because if you're structuring something like that, it's quite easy to say that if you're trying to make a decision, these are the steps. And I've seen 5-step framework to making decisions and ways of thinking through problems and unpicking them and unpacking them and models that you can use, and all those are good tools to help you make a decision. But actually, is this thing have you just got the ability to think critically, or can everyone think critically if given the time and the sort of space and the tools to do it?
Yeah, you can definitely learn to do it. It takes
Right.
practice though, and it
Yeah.
takes like a focused, targeted type of practice. I think, as I mentioned, we learn it over time because we are in situations where we have to apply it, but it's like on the job training. You can actually learn to do it and then start applying those skills or those steps to a myriad of situations in your
Mm.
life, which will help to hone it. But I think it would be erroneous to call it just simply a science. Like, here are the 5 steps that you need to get from point A to point Z. There's
Yeah.
so much art involved, right? Because it is about, you have to be sort of artful in the way that to the
Think.
extent that you're
Yeah.
skillful, you have
Yes.
to be artful. You have to think in an open-minded way about how do you get to that solution. Yeah, you might know that you need to take these steps, but okay, you've taken the step and now you need to get to the next step, and it's not a straight path, right?
Yeah.
Let's say
Yeah.
it's nonlinear and it requires you to think outside of the box, or for you to be creative in how you think about a solution to get to the next
Yeah.
step. That's
Yeah.
where the art comes in, and it's a very important part of it. But it is also something that you learn, like as you start problem solving, right? I don't know if people explicitly understand that they're learning an art and a science and how to bring it together towards critical thinking, which is what I'm suggesting we need. But it is
Yeah.
part of the process that comes out, in the delivery of the solution.
Yeah. Yeah. Gotcha. Are we setting? Oh, you talk about you can learn this. So if we and you mentioned it earlier about sort of early formative years, are we building critical thinkers? Do you think in the system, if I call it that, education in early university in early stage careers? Are we teaching that to people overtly so that they know they're thinking critically? And actually, does that even matter as long as they do it? Or are we missing a trick? Or are we not? Are we
I
not
think
setting
that
ourselves up well for this?
Yeah, I think there are spots in the educational system where people are really focused on, you must be a critical thinker in order
Mm,
to, be successful in this field.
mm,
But I think it gets lost in certain fields, right? So engineers, right? Even data scientists. When I was doing my PhD program, it was all about critique and redesign.
mm.
However, earlier when you're in your sort of university setting, I think if you end up in a course where that is really the focus, you will get that benefit. However, you're often in situations where you're doing what we've been talking about, which is applying, developing critical thinking skills without it being explicitly
Yes.
stated that you're
Yeah.
doing that. And I think what that creates is a situation where you end up with a skill that you've kind of woven together that you don't realize you have. because you haven't understood that, that you are developing this skill along the way.
Yeah. And then of course, yeah, and in some ways that doesn't matter as long as you can critically think, but in other ways it's important, particularly if you then have some responsibility for educating others in how to make decisions and form opinions. You know how to unpack it. What are the steps you go through to think through a problem, to think critically,
Right.
to get to an answer. So in some ways it is really important, isn't it, that
Yeah.
you're doing it.
I think it absolutely matters, because it even the way when you're doing it and you're doing it, you're processing information differently, right?
Mm.
You're storing and categorizing information about that journey that you're taking on that critical thinking process much differently than you would if you were just doing the exercise without acknowledging that this is a skill development process that I'm undergoing.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. And yeah, I can see how as people develop in their careers, I think you and grow up, you start to be a bit more self-aware with what you're good at, what you're not good at, and where your
Right.
gaps are. I mean, if we think about sort of flip this over a little bit to kind of data, and I'm thinking first off around kind of, the industry talks about data literacy or data fluency, and what I tend to think people mean by that, and what I like to think about it is that is helping people to become better at using data to help make decisions. That's what data literacy is about. But what people talk about when they say, well, how do we go and make that happen, is we go to teaching people how to use the dashboarding tools. It's teaching people how to code. It's teaching people potentially even to read data, which is great. But it seems like we miss this bit, which I think is quite important, which is, well, how do I think through problems? How do I form my opinions based on data that I'm seeing? So yeah, just that kind of like bit about enabling literacy, and how important is critical thinking and forming opinions when it comes to trying to create an organization that is literate and fluent in using data for decisions.
Right. It's critically important. As you just pointed out, we often go straight to learning the tools.
Mm.
And we miss the step of really thinking critically through the problem. Forget the tool. Let's be tool agnostic for a moment.
Mm.
Here's an issue that we're trying to solve for. What are the different ways that we could solve for this issue to get to the desired outcome? What are the roundabout ways we could solve for it? What are the more straightforward ways? What are the implications of each way? What are the benefits and cost of each solution? All of that, it doesn't matter what tool you use. Then you do that process, you get to a decision. And once you get to that decision, like, okay, this is the path that I like for this outcome. Then it's like, okay, to get to this outcome, what tool, technology, technique, analytic solution, et cetera, do I need to employ to, to deliver this outcome? And I think to your point, that upfront piece where you start off being tool agnostic is missing for the most part.
Yeah. It seems we've got it a little bit sort of round the wrong way. What we should be teaching organizations, I don't mean specific people particularly, but sort of at a macro level in an organization, is to help an organization to think critically, help them to better form judgments, form opinions, understand problems, unpick problems, and create options. Because the data isn't going to give an answer. It's going to inform the answer that you come up with. So it feels like we often miss this bit. And I think that's a big shame. I suppose it's easy to say I've learned how to use, to build a dashboard in Tableau, but it's not as easy to say I've learned to be a critical thinker.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And then sort of moving that kind of thinking about data forward, there's value. So we've talked about the people who are in data there, about helping them to make better decisions. There's also the value of data in helping people to think critically. And that's obviously then the big topic of why organizations use data. But how big a part does that genuinely play? We talked about science and art there a bit, but the thing about using the data to help you to think critically, is that an important component?
It is absolutely imperative, because only with data can you actually get to the facts. Like, what's real?
Mm.
What is, using statistics to help you understand variations of things, gradations of things, frequencies, how much of this, how much is it really impacting the outcome? It's only through the use of data that you can get to the point where you have statistics and facts. That's why it's so important that people are data literate, just going back to your previous question, because without data literacy, you end up watching TV and listening to people rail off stats on TV that you think are real. And then when you go, pull the onion back a little bit and look at how they got to that number, if you were data literate, you might be in a position to say, that stat that they just gave us is meaningless. Like that's part of the story they're trying to tell. But looking at the data, I am able to uncover that stat is not real. It's not a meaningful stat, that there are so many other ways they could have told this story. And maybe there's a reason they're not giving you the most meaningful stat, but see how it puts you in a position to even critique what happens around you in a day-to-day, on a day-to-day basis. Data.
You start to be able to question. Critical thinking helps you to question what's real, what's true, what's not true, what's perception, what's reality. It's real. I just noticed the kind of the cycle there in terms of, maybe it's my consultant brain coming out, because I like a drawing with arrows and boxes, but is you need critical thinking to help start unpicking a problem. You then need data to help inform your judgments, your opinions, your ideas about how to solve whatever problem it is you're trying to solve. And then you use critical thinking to help you decide which of the things that you want to ignore, which things you should go forward with, and what's the best way to make a decision. It kind of wraps around the start and end of the process of helping to solve a problem.
Yeah, I definitely think it's a little bit of a chicken and egg problem. Like you need the data to really be most effective at your critical thinking. And then you need critical thinking to help better inform and interpret the data and so forth and so on, right? So it's like a cycle.
It is a cycle, yeah. I'm not going mad then. Chicken and eggs is a better way to explain it. That kind of points out as well, this all brings to the fore this idea of opinions and facts and perceptions, because and the critical thinking helps with this, is that whilst you can look at something and it can be presented as fact, actually it's a fact that steers you to a certain outcome. Whilst you might have a perception of something, that perception is only real to you, not to somebody else. We get a bit philosophical, but again, I think critical thinking helps you, as long as you're self-aware. I think it probably helps you to understand what's my opinion, and that's probably coming from experience. What's a fact in that this thing definitely happened? What's a perception in that that's the way I see it? Does critical thinking help you to kind of really work out, which of those are a stat or a data point or a thing you've heard sort of falls into?
Yeah, so that's interesting because opinion is really just, a point of view, right? It doesn't have to be based on fact, doesn't even have to be rooted in reality. It could be whatever, like that's your opinion. And obviously, as we've talked about, the fact is really supported by the data and the analytics and the research and the statistics.
Yeah.
Perception, though, is a little bit dangerous, right? Because perceptions, there's a sensory overlay to that opinion, right? So then it becomes, I feel like this, which is my opinion. And as a result, I feel a certain way, right? So that's the sensory overlay. And that creates problems because for many people, perception becomes reality. So as a brand, right, you're a corporation and your facts are often smothered by perception. Like if people perceive you in a certain way, regardless of what the facts are, it's often hard for those facts to combat perception.
Well, right? Perception becomes comes to the fore.
And it becomes the thing that people associate you with, the way they start to feel about you. And it takes a forced march campaign with real stats and people speaking the truth to actually tear that false perception down, right? So because perceptions have this like sensory overlay element that drives an emotion, it becomes a very it feels real, right? Factual, even though sometimes it's not.
Yeah. I mean, obviously not all perceptions are bad. And in
Right.
fact, you spend a lot of time in marketing, and a lot of the work of marketing is to create the view of someone, the opinion of someone, the perception that someone has of you as a business. And you might use facts to do that. Often you use a bit of fact, you use a bit of entertainment, but you're
Right.
trying to get that kind of emotional attachment with something that creates the perception of something. And I don't mean perception as an illusion or in a bad way. I just
Right.
mean the how you feel about something, how you
Right.
interact with something.
Really good marketers know how to use facts to drive perceptions.
Yeah. And then hopefully behavior.
Yeah.
And then hopefully behavior.
Yes.
Where's your, I know obviously you sort of got some education in this, but where's you don't necessarily, one doesn't necessarily stick to their education in their journey. So where's your kind of love and passion and kind of desire to build a career around this topic come from?
Um, as I mentioned at the start, I've always been sort of in the research analytics and data space. And as my career has matured over time, it's really become more about accessibility, right? Like the
Right.
importance of data. We are mired in terabytes of data daily. And I feel the evolution of data is happening so quickly that it's separating people. It's like
Mm,
people who know data and people who don't, right?
right.
And I really feel like accessibility, making sure people are data literate, understand how to interpret data and information, have the bare bone tools for really thinking critically through data is an important sort of gauntlet to take up, right? Because it is moving rapidly. I think people who personally and professionally don't adopt the skill will sort of be left behind,
Mm,
right? And so regardless of industry, and regardless of like decisions you're making in your life, you're buying a mortgage, you're getting a car, all of these things, you
yeah.
still need to be able to think, and it will reduce some of the like the biases we see in society. I mean, you may, sometimes you hear like, oh, the car dealers, they love when the wife comes because she doesn't know the numbers,
Mm,
like
mm,
a historical
mm,
stereotype. And the reality is, people have been socialized into certain ways of thinking.
yeah.
And data accessibility and data literacy really closes all of those gaps where there are biases, where there are people who know data and people who don't, where there are distinctions between this field and that field, regardless of the field, regardless of your gender, regardless of your background, you can make data accessible to you because
Yeah.
it's not like something you have to buy,
Mm.
right? You can train yourself, as you and I have talked about. You just have to be focused and do it in a targeted way.
Yeah. And as we've said, think of it as critical thinking, not as data, because data
That's
just
right.
having data and metrics and the insights is only one part of being able to think critically. We actually we talked a bit about solving problems here, a lot about solving problems. And using critical thinking to solve problems. But it's not just for solving problems, is it? There's making
No,
decisions. We mentioned forming opinions.
that's right.
It's applicable and transferable across lots of different things that we want to do in life, right?
It is completely transferable to every scenario in your life, down to something like you're having a baby and you're trying to decide which car seat to buy,
Mm,
right? Like everyday decisions. I'm in the process of selling my house and I have all these decisions to make. How to, I have to choose a moving company. I have to, figure out what to do with my furniture. I have to figure out where to live in the interim because I'm going to be homeless.
oh God.
You got any space where you are?
Welcome to flyover.
But so every single day there are these things that we are doing that where we need data to help us think more critically and where we should be using these skills and building these skills.
Yeah. Well, I'm definitely rooting for you to use your critical thinking skills to solve your house moving dilemma.
you.
I know you can do it, Tiffany.
I think so. I
I
think
know
so.
you can do it. This has been it's been brilliant talking to you. I came into this being a big believer, particularly around this data literacy point, that critical thinking is what we should be teaching people at least as much, if not the same as the other sort of technical skills we give people. And I'm now even more behind that view.
Yes.
But yes, great talking to you, and great talking through critical thinking and forming opinions, and
Yeah.
yeah, and your role in doing that. So yeah, thank you for coming on the show. Really appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you for having me. I think our next step is to develop a course. We can develop a course
We
on
can.
critical thinking.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah. I think yeah. Let's yeah, we're going to follow up offline to do that.
yes.
I love it. I can't wait. I can't wait. No, listen, thank you again. Love talking to you. Appreciate all your time, and yeah, I'll definitely catch you soon.
Yeah. Thank you very much. I'll talk
Thanks a
to you
lot.
soon.
Yeah,
Okay.
thanks everyone for listening. Hope you enjoyed that show, and we'll catch you soon.
Ciao.